Blood drained from Victoria Chamberlain's face as her janitor of 20 years strapped himself into the pilot's seat of her $12 million helicopter, accepting the 1% ownership stake she'd just mockingly wagered against his ability to fly. The storm outside intensified as Miguel's weathered hands moved across the control panel with practiced precision, revealing the decorated military pilot who had been invisible beneath the maintenance uniform all along. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The morning sun cast long shadows across the polished marble floors of Skyline Enterprises headquarters as Miguel Reyes pushed his cleaning cart through the executive floor. 20 years of service had made him invisible to the power brokers who strode past him daily. They saw the uniform, not the man. Not that Miguel minded much. Invisibility had its advantages, like overhearing things you weren't supposed to. Today, though, the energy on the 50th floor crackled with intention. Through the glass walls of the conference room, Miguel could see CEO Victoria Chamberlain pacing like a caged tiger, her tailored navy suit a stark contrast to the panicked expressions of her executive team. Their voices carried through the partially open door. The Nakamura deal is hanging by a thread, Victoria snapped. If we're not in Tokyo by tomorrow morning, they'll sign with Apex instead. Everything we've worked for gone. The storm system has grounded all commercial flights, responded a nervous-looking man clutching a tablet. Private jets too. 4A regulations. I don't care about regulations, Charles. Find me a solution or find yourself a new job. Miguel kept his head down, methodically emptying waste bins while absorbing every word. Skyline's troubles weren't his concern, but old habits from his previous life, the one before he became invisible, made him pay attention to details others missed. What about the company helicopter? Suggested a woman with steel-rimmed glasses. It's rated for this weather. Victoria's expression brightened momentarily before darkening again. Where's Davis? Get me my pilot. Charles cleared his throat. That's the other problem. Davis called in. His father passed away last night. He's already on his way to Phoenix. Miguel watched Victoria's face contort with frustration as she slammed her palm against the boardroom table. Perfect. Just perfect. We have a helicopter and no one to fly it. That's just... Excuse me, Miguel heard himself say, surprised by his own interruption. The room fell silent as 8 heads swiveled toward the doorway where he stood, garbage bag in hand. Victoria's eyes narrowed. We're in a meeting. I know, Ms. Chamberlain. I couldn't help overhearing. I can fly your helicopter. The silence shattered as laughter erupted around the table. Victoria's expression shifted from annoyance to amusement. You? The janitor? She arched a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Miguel stood straighter, something hardening in his expression. Yes, ma'am. I flew Blackhawks for 12 years. 2 tours in Afghanistan. I'm certified for multiple aircraft, including your Augusta AW109. The executives exchanged uncertain glances, but Victoria's smile only widened with obvious skepticism. Charles, who is this man? Charles fumbled with his tablet. Miguel Reyes, maintenance staff, with us for 20 years. Victoria circled the table, approaching Miguel with the calculated grace of a predator. 20 years pushing a mop, and you expect me to believe you're a helicopter pilot? That's quite a career change, Miss R. Reyes Miguel met her gaze without flinching. Life takes unexpected turns, Ms. Chamberlain. Indeed it does. Victoria studied him for a moment, her eyes calculating. Tell me, why would someone with your alleged qualifications be cleaning our offices instead of flying? The room grew uncomfortably quiet. Miguel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. My wife got sick, terminal cancer. The hours here let me take care of her. After she passed, inertia, I guess. The healthcare benefits are good. My daughter needed stability. Victoria's expression didn't soften, but something flickered in her eyes. Respect, perhaps, or simple curiosity. A touching story, but I need more than stories to trust someone with a $12 million aircraft and a $1 billion deal. She glanced at her watch. The Nakamura meeting is in 14 hours. We need to leave within 2 to make it. Miguel nodded once. Check my credentials. Call my former CO, Lieutenant Colonel James Harwick, 160th SOAR, Special Operations Aviation. Charles was already typing frantically on his tablet. Victoria's smile turned predatory. Night Stalkers. Impressive name-dropping, Mr. Reyes. But even if you once could fly, that was what, 15 years ago? Regulations require current certification, recent flight hours, ... single quotes. I maintain my certifications on my own time. Ms. Chamberlain, I have the necessary flight hours. I can show you my logbook. Something shifted in Victoria's demeanor, a gleam of challenge in her eyes. Let's say I believe you, which I don't. The risk is still extraordinary. Not as extraordinary as losing your Nakamura deal, Miguel replied evenly. The executives murmured among themselves. Victoria silenced them with a raised hand, never taking her eyes off Miguel. Do you know what's at stake here, Reyes? This deal represents the future of Skyline. 5,000 jobs. My legacy. She stepped closer, the expensive perfume she wore filling the space between them. What's at stake for you? Miguel considered the question. Nothing. I go back to my card either way. Victoria laughed, a genuine sound of surprise. At least you're honest. She seemed to make a decision. All right, Mr. Reyes, let's make this interesting. She turned to the room. Charles, have security escort Miss Reyes to retrieve his certifications. Then bring him to the helipad and verify his story. Call this Colonel whatever. Harwick, Miguel supplied. Yes, him. Victoria waved her hand dismissively before fixing Miguel with an intense stare. Mr. Reyes, I'm a gambling woman. So here's the deal. If you can prove you're qualified and safely fly us to Tokyo, I'll give you a job as our new chief pilot at triple your current salary. The room buzzed with shocked whispers. And if I'm wrong about you, single quotes, she paused dramatically. I'll bet my company you can't land that helicopter, Charles gasped. Victoria, you can't be serious. Oh, but I am, she replied, eyes still locked with Miguel's. If Reyes here crashes my helicopter or fails to get us to Tokyo safely, he gets nothing except possibly a prison sentence. But if he's lying about his qualifications or freezes up there, single quotes, she pointed upward. If he puts us in danger and I have to intervene, because yes, gentlemen, in case you've forgotten, I am also a licensed pilot, then Mr. Reyes will own 1% of Skyline Enterprises. The executives erupted in protests. 1% of Skyline was worth over $30 million. You can't just give away company shares on a whim, Charles sputtered. Watch me, Victoria replied coolly. I still control 51%. This 1% will come from my personal shares. She smiled at Miguel. Consider it motivation to be honest about your abilities, Mr. Reyes. So do we have a deal? Miguel studied her face, recognizing the trap she was setting. She didn't believe him. This was her way of calling his bluff, expecting him to back down. If he was lying, he'd face humiliation at best, criminal charges at worst. But if he was telling the truth, We have a deal, Ems. Chamberlain, he said quietly. Victoria's smile widened. Excellent. We leave in 1 hour. Don't disappoint me, Mr. Reyes. She turned back to her executives. Meeting adjourned. Pack light, gentlemen, as security arrived to escort him. Miguel caught Victoria's final words to her assistant. Schedule an emergency board meeting for tomorrow, and find Davis a suitable condolence gift for his loss. We'll need him when this little charade is over. She truly believed he would fail. Miguel felt a familiar calm settle over him, the same calm that had kept him alive during night missions over hostile territory. Victoria Chamberlain had just made the mistake of underestimating him. Again. 1 hour later, Miguel stood on the helipad atop Skyline Tower, the wind whipping his maintenance uniform as he completed his pre-flight inspection of the gleaming, white Augusta AW-109. His weathered hands moved with practiced precision over the aircraft's exterior, checking every connection, every moving part with methodical thoroughness. This ritual, performed thousands of times before, centered him in a way nothing else could. Behind the glass walls of the rooftop lounge, Victoria and her executive team watched him with varying expressions of disbelief and amusement. Only Charles looked genuinely concerned, frantically whispering something in Victoria's ear that she seemed to dismiss with an impatient gesture. Miguel could read their thoughts as clearly as if they were speaking aloud. The janitor thinks he's a pilot. What a joke. Let him have his moment before reality crashes down. The door to the helipad swung open, and Victoria emerged, flanked by Charles and 2 other executives. She had changed into a more practical but no less expensive black pantsuit, her hair now secured in a tight ponytail. The wind molded the fabric of her clothing against her slender frame as she approached. Well, Mr. Reyes, she called over the sound of the wind. Is my $12 million investment airworthy? Miguel nodded, keeping his expression neutral. She's ready to fly. And you? Victoria's smile was razor sharp. Are you ready to fly, or should we end this charade now? In response, Miguel simply held up the folder containing his certifications, logbook, and military records. Charles had already verified them, his face growing increasingly pale as each document proved authentic. Miguel had watched the man's demeanor shift from smug dismissal to uncomfortable realization that the janitor was, in fact, exactly what he claimed to be. Victoria snatched the folder, flipping through it with narrowed eyes. Her confident smile faltered slightly as she scanned the impressive record of Miguel's flying career. 2 distinguished flying crosses, Presidential Unit Citation, over 3,000 flight hours in combat conditions. Surprised? Miguel asked quietly. Victoria snapped the folder shut. It takes more than paperwork to impress me, Mr. Reyes. She handed the documents to Charles. Let's see you prove it. The challenge hung in the air between them. Miguel simply nodded and gestured toward the helicopter. After you, Ms. Chamberlain. As the executives filed into the passenger compartment, Victoria lingered, watching Miguel with calculating eyes. You know, she said, her voice dropping so only he could hear, most men would have thrown these credentials in my face the moment I doubted them. Your restraint is unusual. Miguel didn't respond immediately, busying himself with securing their luggage in the compartment. I stopped needing to prove myself to people a long time ago, Ms. Chamberlain. Something flashed in her eyes. Irritation, perhaps. Or curiosity. Before she could respond, Charles emerged from the cabin, holding his tablet. Victoria, I just got confirmation from Lieutenant Colonel Harwick. He glanced nervously at Miguel. Everything checks out. Mr. Reyes was one of their most decorated pilots. The colonel seemed quite surprised to hear where he's working now. Victoria's composure slipped for just a fraction of a second. I see. She recovered quickly, her expression hardening. Well, let's not keep the Nakamuras waiting. I assume you can still fit behind the controls, Mr. Reyes. Miguel held her gaze. I guess we'll find out. Once everyone was aboard, Miguel settled into the pilot's seat with the ease of a man returning home after a long absence. His hands moved across the instrument panel, muscle memory guiding each motion. The familiar sensations washed over him, the smell of aviation fuel and leather upholstery, the slight vibration of the airframe, the responsive touch of the controls. Victoria took the co-pilot seat beside him, fastening her harness with practiced movements. "I'll be monitoring every decision you make," she informed him coolly. "One mistake and I take over." Miguel nodded, unperturbed. "Of course." He began the startup sequence, each action precise and confident. The turbine engines whined to life, the main rotor slowly beginning its rotation above them. The executives in the back grew silent, the reality of what was happening finally sinking in. "Skyline Tower," to Skyline 1 requesting clearance for takeoff. Miguel spoke into his headset, his voice calm and authoritative. A voice that belonged to the cockpit, not the janitorial closet. Victoria watched him with undisguised scrutiny, her finger hovering near the emergency override switch. The tension in the cabin was palpable as the helicopter lifted from the pad, hovering momentarily before Miguel guided it forward and upward into the gray, storm-threatened sky. The Tokyo flight plan would take them first to Anchorage for refueling, then across the northern Pacific, a challenging route even in good weather. With the approaching storm system, it would test even the most experienced pilot's skills. They had been airborne for 20 minutes, the skyscrapers of the city giving way to suburbs and then open countryside when Victoria finally spoke. "Why?" she asked, her voice private in their headset connection. "Why spend 20 years cleaning floors when you could have been flying?" Miguel adjusted their heading slightly before answering. "After my wife's diagnosis, I needed stability, regular hours. Skyline offered that, but after she passed," Victoria pressed. "That was what, 12 years ago, according to your file?" Miguel glanced at her, surprised she had read that detail. "By then, my daughter was settled in her school and had friends. I didn't want to uproot her with a job that would take me away for days at a time." Victoria studied his profile. "And now? Your daughter must be 23, Miguel supplied, finishing medical school at Johns Hopkins. "So why stay a janitor? With your qualifications, any aviation company would," Ms. Chamberlain. Miguel interrupted gently. "Not everyone measures success by their job title or salary." Victoria fell silent, her expression suggesting she found this concept utterly foreign. The helicopter's radio crackled with an incoming transmission. "Skyline 1, this is a TC. Be advised we're tracking severe weather system moving in from the northwest. Recommend immediate course adjustment. Sending coordinates now." Miguel acknowledged the warning, studying the updated weather data on the navigation screen. The storm was intensifying faster than predicted, a massive front of turbulence and precipitation directly in their path. "We need to divert," he stated, already calculating alternative routes. Victoria frowned. "That will add hours to our flight time." "The Nakamura's would prefer you arrive late than not at all," Miguel replied firm. For a tense moment, Victoria looked ready to challenge him. Then, surprisingly, she nodded. "Your call, pilot." Miguel banked the helicopter, adjusting their course to skirt the worst of the approaching storm. But even as he did, he could see they wouldn't avoid it entirely. The dark wall of clouds loomed ahead, occasional flashes of lightning illuminating their turbulent depths. "It's going to get rough," he warned, switching to the cabin intercom. "Secure any loose items and tighten your harnesses." Victoria studied the approaching storm front, her expression unreadable. "You've flown through worse than this?" Miguel's mind flashed to night missions over Afghanistan mountains, navigating by instruments alone while tracer fire lit up the darkness around him. "Yes," he said simply. Victoria's hand moved away from the override switch, a subtle gesture of trust that didn't go unnoticed. "Then show me what you can do, Mr. Reyes," she said quietly. "Prove me wrong." As the helicopter penetrated the outer bands of the storm, the first violent gusts buffeted the aircraft. Miguel's hands moved steadily on the controls, compensating for each turbulent shift with the instinctive precision of a true aviator. Victoria watched him, really seeing him perhaps for the first time. The maintenance uniform couldn't hide what was now plainly evident. The man beside her was exactly what he claimed to be, and they were flying into the heart of the storm. The storm swallowed them whole. Outside the cockpit windows, the world disappeared into a churning gray void, occasionally illuminated by brilliant flashes of lightning. Rain lashed against the glass in horizontal sheets, driven by winds that seemed determined to pluck the helicopter from the sky. In the passenger cabin, the executives had fallen into a tense silence, white-knuckled hands gripping armrests as the aircraft pitched and yawed. Even Charles had stopped checking his tablet, his face a sickly shade of green as he stared fixedly at the floor. But in the cockpit, Miguel was in his element. His hands moved with confident precision across the controls, making continuous micro-adjustments to keep them stable. His eyes darted between the instrument panel and what little he could see of the world outside, reading the storm like a familiar text. Victoria watched him, fascination gradually replacing skepticism. There was an economy to his movements, a calm focus that spoke of countless hours navigating similar challenges. Nothing in his demeanor suggested the janitor she thought she knew. "How bad is it?" she asked, her voice steady despite the violent shuddering of the airframe. 7 out of 10, Miguel replied without taking his eyes from the instruments. "The crosswinds are the biggest concern. We're being pushed east faster than I'd like." A particularly strong gust caught them, and the helicopter lurched sideways. From the cabin came a chorus of gasps and one hastily stifled cry. Miguel compensated immediately, his adjustment adjustments so smooth that within seconds they were stable again. Make that 8 out of 10, he amended with the ghost of a smile. Victoria studied his profile. What's a 10? Miguel's expression grew distant. Kandahar Province, 2005. Night extraction under enemy fire. Dust storm so thick you couldn't see the ground until you were 10 feet above it. Lost 2 men on the ground before we could get them out. The casual mention of such danger, delivered in the same tone one might use to discuss a traffic delay, left Victoria momentarily speechless. And you flew in those conditions? Someone's sons needed to come home, he said simply. Another violent updraft caught them, and Miguel frowned at the navigation display. This isn't working. We need to climb above it. Can we make it that high? Victoria asked, glancing at the altitude indicator. We're about to find out. Miguel increased power to the engines, and the helicopter began a steady ascent, fighting against the downward pressure of the storm. The executives in the back grew even quieter as the aircraft struggled upward through the turbulence. The sound of the engines changed pitch, working harder against the opposing forces of nature. Miguel murmured to the helicopter, his voice barely audible. Show me what you've got. Victoria found herself holding her breath, watching the altimeter tick upward in agonizing increments. The storm battered them relentlessly, each violent gust threatening to push them back down into its depths. Then, with startling suddenness, they broke through the cloud ceiling. The helicopter leveled out into a serene, sunlit world. Below them stretched a vast carpet of storm clouds, turbulent and dark. Above, only the infinite blue of the stratosphere. A collective sigh of relief echoed through the cabin. Victoria released her death grip on the armrest, flexing fingers that had gone numb. Impressive, she admitted, the word clearly not coming easily to her. Miguel acknowledged the compliment with a slight nod. We'll need to adjust our course. That storm pushed us about 30 miles off our planned route. Victoria checked her watch. How far behind schedule does that put us? We'll make up most of it once we refuel in Anchorage. The headwinds aren't as strong as forecast. He glanced at her. You'll make your meeting. Good. She paused, then added, My father would have liked you. The non sequitur caught Miguel off guard. He glanced at her briefly before returning his attention to the controls. Your father was a pilot? Victoria nodded. Navy. Flew F-14s off carriers before founding Skyline. He believed you could tell everything important about a person by how they handled themselves in a crisis. And what would he have thought about you betting 1% of his company on a janitor? Miguel asked, his tone light but the question point. Victoria's expression cool. He would have understood the calculated risk. Because you never believed I could do it, Miguel stated rather than asked. She didn't deny it. Would you have made the bet if you were in my position? No, Miguel replied honestly. But not because I doubted my ability to judge character. The subtle rebuke hung in the air between them. Victoria bristled visibly but said nothing, turning instead to look out at the blue expanse surrounding them. Several minutes passed in silence before she spoke again. 20 years, she said quietly. You've worked at Skyline for 20 years, and until today, I never really saw you. Miguel kept his eyes on the horizon. Most people don't. That doesn't bother you? There was genuine curiosity in her voice. Should it? Victoria frowned. Of course it should. You have extraordinary skills. Talents being wasted mopping floors and emptying trash cans. Is that all you think I do? Miguel asked. She blinked, caught off guard. Isn't it? I maintain your building. I ensure the safety and comfort of everyone who works there. I'm the first to arrive and the last to leave. I know every inch of that tower better than the architects who designed it. His voice remained even, factual rather than defensive. Your father built Skyline from nothing. Don't you think he understood the value of every position, from CEO to custodian? Victoria stared at him, something uncomfortable shifting behind her eyes. Before she could respond, the radio crackled to life. Skyline 1, this is Anchorage, a TC. We're tracking you at flight level 220. Be advised. Refueling may be delayed due to ground congestion from diverted flights. Current estimated wait time is 3 hours. Miguel acknowledged the message, then turned to Victoria. 3 hours puts the Tokyo meeting at risk. Victoria's jaw tightened. Unacceptable. We need alternatives. There's a private airfield near Juneau, Miguel suggested. Smaller facility, less traffic. We'd need to adjust our flight path now to make it work. Can they accommodate us? I know the owner, Miguel said. Former military. We served together. Victoria raised an eyebrow. More hidden connections, Mr. Reyes. Miguel allowed himself a small smile. The world is smaller than you think, Miss Chamberlain. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. Make the call. As Miguel contacted his former comrade and arranged the diversion, Victoria opened the compartment beneath her seat and removed a slim leather portfolio. From it, she extracted several documents related to the Nakamura. Since we have a moment of calm, she said, I should review these figures before the meet. She hesitated, then added, unless you need assistance with navigation. The offer acknowledgement that he was now the pilot, not the janitor, wasn't lost on Miguel. I've got it covered, he assured her. But thank you. Victoria nodded and immersed herself in the documents. Miguel adjusted their course toward Juneau, mentally calculating fuel consumption against their new route. In the cabin behind them, the executives had recovered enough to resume quiet conversation. The immediate danger had passed, but Miguel knew better than to relax completely. The journey to Tokyo was far from over, and they still had to descend through the storm again before reaching Juneau. He glanced at Victoria, absorbed in her work beside him. For 20 years she had walked past him without a second glance. Now, 30,000 feet above the earth, she was finally seeing him. He wondered if she was also beginning to see herself differently. The radio crackled again. Skyline 1, this is Juneau approach. We've got you on radar. Be advised, We're tracking electrical activity in your vicinity. Recommend immediate descent to flight level 180. Miguel acknowledged the warning, eyeing the dark mass of clouds below them with experienced caution. The storm was intensifying, spreading across their path like a living entity. Looks like our calm moment is over, he told Victoria as he began their descent. We need to get below this system before it gets worse. Victoria secured her documents and refastened her harness. I thought we were above the storm. We were, Miguel replied grimly. But storms don't stay still. This one's growing faster than predicted. As they descended back into the turbulent gray world, lightning flashed dangerously close to their position. The helicopter shuddered violently, and warning lights flickered on the instrument panel. What's happening? Victoria asked, tension returning to her voice. Miguel's eyes narrowed as he assessed the indicators. Possible electrical interference from the lightning. The avionics are... His explanation was cut short by a deafening crack as a bolt of lightning struck the helicopter's tail section. The instrument panel went dark for 3 terrifying seconds before backup systems engaged. Status, Victoria demanded, her CEO voice returning in full force. Miguel's hands flew across the controls, his face set in a mask of intense concentration. We've lost primary electrical, switching to backup systems. His voice remained calm, but his eyes told a different story. We need to land, now. Darkness enveloped the cockpit, save for the dim glow of emergency backup systems. The helicopter pitched violently, descending through the storm at a rate that made Victoria's stomach lurch. Behind them, the executives had fallen into terrified silence, broken only by desperate prayers muttered under breath. Talk to me, Mr. Reyes, Victoria demanded, fighting to keep her voice steady as she gripped the edges of her seat. Miguel's face was illuminated in brief, ghostly flashes by distant lightning, his expression a mask of absolute concentration. His hands never stopped moving across the controls, making constant adjustments as the damaged aircraft fought against him. Tail rotor damaged. Primary navigation compromised, he reported with military efficiency. Backup systems functional but limited. We've lost weather radar. He glanced at her briefly. This is going to be rough. Victoria swallowed hard. Define rough controlled crash, Miguel replied, scanning the emergency terrain mapping system. We need to find somewhere to set down before we lose hydraulics. The radio crackled with static as Miguel attempted to transmit a mayday call. The response was fragmented, barely intelligible through the electrical interference. Copy Skyline 1 position emergency services. Miguel keyed the mic again. Juno approach. Skyline 1 declaring emergency. Lightning strike, electrical failure, requesting immediate vectors to nearest suitable landing site. More static. Then coordinate small airstrip 7 miles heading 045. Miguel adjusted their course, fighting against winds that seemed determined to push them in the opposite direction. The helicopter shuddered ominously, a new warning light blinking on the instrument panel. What's that? Victoria asked, pointing to the flashing indicator. Hydraulic pressure dropping. Miguel's voice remained calm, but the tension in his shoulders told a different story. I need you to do something for me. Victoria straightened, nodding once. Tell me. Take the emergency checklist from that compartment. He nodded toward a panel near her knee. Fine tail rotor failure. Read me the steps. Victoria retrieved the laminated card with surprisingly steady hands, quickly locating the relevant section. Maintain forward airspeed above 60 knots, she read. Already doing that, Miguel confirmed. Next, reduce collective to minimum necessary. Avoid rapid power changes. Check. Continue. As Victoria read through the procedures, Miguel executed each step with practiced precision. The executives in the passenger compartment had fallen silent, listening to the calm exchange between pilot and CEO with a mixture of terror and desperate hope. Last item, Victoria said. Prepare for running landing if hydraulic pressure continues to decline. Miguel's expression tightened. That's where we are. Look outside, to your right. Do you see it? Victoria pressed her face against the rain-streaked window, squinting through the gloom. Below, barely visible through gaps in the clouds, she could make out a thin strip of asphalt bordered by dense forest. The airstrip? Miguel nodded. Too small for a normal approach with a damaged tail rotor. We'll have one shot at this. The helicopter lurched again, dropping several hundred feet in seconds before Miguel could stabilize. Another warning light joined the first, this one accompanied by an insistent beeping. That doesn't sound good, Victoria observed, her calm tone belying the fear evident in her eyes. Hydraulic system failure imminent, Miguel confirmed. Need to put her down now. He switched to the intercom. Everyone in the back brace positions, heads down, arms crossed, feet flat on the floor. We're making an emergency landing. Charles's voice came through, high and strained. Landing where? There's nothing but mountains and trees. There's an airstrip, Victoria replied before Miguel could. Mr. Reyes has it under control. Her confidence in him, whether genuine or performative, earned her a quick, appreciative glance from Miguel. 1 minute to touchdown, he announced. When we're on the ground, exit quickly but orderly. Clear the aircraft immediately in case of fire. Victoria nodded, her mind racing through contingency plans. The Nakamura deal seemed suddenly trivial compared to their survival. If they made it through this, if Miguel somehow landed this damaged helicopter in the middle of nowhere, the thought remained unfinished as Miguel began their final approach. The small airstrip grew larger beneath them, a narrow black ribbon amid an ocean of green. The rain had lessened slightly, but the wind continued to buffet them from all sides. This is going to be unconventional, Miguel warned, his focus absolute. A helicopter with no tail rotor control can't hover. We need to maintain forward movement until touchdown. Victoria understood the implication. A running landing. Miguel nodded grimly. Like landing a plane. We'll slide. The ground rushed up to meet them with alarming speed. Miguel's hands moved with impossible precision, adjusting their attitude and descent rate by feel as much as by the failing instruments. Brace, he called as the helicopter's skids made first contact with the asphalt. The impact was jarring but controlled. The aircraft skidded forward, metal screeching against pavement as Miguel fought to keep them aligned with the runway. For one terrible moment, it seemed they might veer off into the surrounding trees, but Miguel expertly manipulated the remaining controls to keep them centered. After what felt like an eternity, they slid to a stop, the helicopter listing slightly to one side. For a heartbeat, nobody moved or spoke. Then Miguel was in motion, shutting down systems, securing the controls. Everyone out, he ordered, already reaching for Victoria's harness to help her clear the aircraft. The executives needed no further encouragement. Cabin door flew open, and they scrambled out onto the rain-soaked tarmac, staggering away from the helicopter on unsteady legs. Victoria paused at the cockpit door, turning back to Miguel. "Aren't you coming?" He shook his head, still methodically working through shutdown procedures. "Need to secure the aircraft. Fuel systems, electrical. Go. I'm staying," she stated, her tone brooking no argument. Miguel looked up, surprise briefly replacing concentration. "Ms. Chamberlain, Victoria," she corrected. "And I'm staying. Tell me how to help." After a moment's hesitation, Miguel nodded. "Check the fuel cutoff valve. Red handle under the center console." They worked in seamless tandem for the next 2 minutes, securing the damaged helicopter. Only when Miguel was satisfied did they finally exit, stepping out into the cold Alaskan rain. The small airstrip was deserted except for a single weather-beaten hangar about 100 yards away. The executives huddled near it, looking shell-shocked and bedraggled. Victoria surveyed the scene, her CEO mindset reasserting itself. "Where are we, exactly?" Elk Creek Airfield, Miguel replied, conducting a quick external assessment of the helicopter's damage. Private strip, primarily used by bush pilots in the occasional Coast Guard training exercise. The tail section showed obvious damage, blackened composite material where the lightning had struck, and the tail rotor blade bent at an unnatural angle. "Can it be fixed?" Victoria asked. Miguel shook his head. "Not here. Not quickly. So we're stranded. For now." Miguel glanced toward the distant hangar. "Let's get everyone inside. I'll make some calls." As they walked toward the shelter, Victoria studied him with new eyes. The maintenance uniform was soaked through, his salt and pepper hair plastered to his forehead, yet he walked with the same quiet dignity he'd always possessed, the dignity she'd never bothered to notice before today. "You saved our lives," she said quietly. Miguel shrugged, uncomfortable with the acknowledgement. "Did my job. Your job is mopping floors," Victoria countered. "Today my job was flying," he replied simply. "Tomorrow, who knows?" They reached the hangar, where Charles immediately approached, his face ashen. "Victoria, this is a disaster. The Nakamura meeting is still happening," she interrupted firmly. Reyes, what's our fastest route to communications?" Miguel gestured toward a small office attached to the hangar. "Should be a satellite phone in there. Owner keeps it for emergencies." As they stepped inside the musty hangar, the reality of their situation became clearer. They were alive, but stranded in the Alaskan wilderness, with a critically important business meeting less than 12 hours away on the other side of the Pacific. Victoria's mind was already racing with alternatives, contingencies, possibilities. But underlying it all was a newfound respect for the man who had just proven himself far more than a janitor. The man she had bet her company couldn't land a helicopter. The hangar's office was barely large enough for 2 people. A metal desk cluttered with outdated aviation charts occupied most of the space, while a faded poster of an Alaskan bush plane soaring over pristine wilderness adorned the wall. Rain drummed steadily on the corrugated metal roof, creating a hypnotic backdrop to their predicament. Victoria emerged from the cramped space, satellite phone in hand, her expression grim but determined. The executives gathered around her expectantly, like survivors waiting for news of rescue. "The Nakamura meeting will proceed as scheduled," she announced. "I've spoken with their chief operating officer. Given our circumstances, they've agreed to a video conference for initial discussions, but the final signatures must happen in person within 48 hours. Charles stepped forward, his usual composure still fragmented by their near-death experience. "That's impossible. We're in the middle of nowhere with a wrecked helicopter." Victoria's gaze hardened. "Nothing is impossible. We need transportation to Juneau, then a charter to Tokyo." "In this weather?" Charles gestured toward the hangar door, where rain continued to fall in sheets. "Even if we could reach Juneau, no small aircraft is flying in this storm." Miguel had been quietly inspecting an old radio unit in the corner of the hangar. He turned to Charles's words. "He's right about small aircraft, but there are alternatives." All eyes shifted to him, the janitor who had just saved their lives, now standing in their midst as an equal. Victoria nodded for him to continue. "Coast Guard has a station near Juneau," Miguel explained. "They run C-130s that can handle this weather. My former squadron commander is stationed there." "Another convenient connection," Charles muttered, not quite under his breath. Miguel's expression didn't change. "Military tends to stick together." Victoria made a decision. "Make the call." If they can get us to Anchorage, we can connect with a commercial flight to Tokyo. While Miguel contacted his former commander, Victoria gathered the executives for a strategy session. The Nakamura contract represented billions in potential revenue, a game-changing deal that would define her legacy as CEO. Failure wasn't an option. Charles prepared the digital presentation package. Jensen, draft a contingency offering with an additional 5% stake if they'll extend the signing deadline. Her commands were precise, leaving no room for debate. We're gonna make this work. Across the hangar, Miguel spoke quietly into the satellite phone, his back turned to the corporate strategizing. Victoria found herself watching him, the straight posture, the economy of movement, the calm authority that seemed so natural now but had been completely invisible during his 20 years emptying her trash bins. When he returned to the group, his expression gave nothing away. Well, Victoria prompted. They're sending a helicopter, Miguel reported. Weather's improving slightly. 8 to 90 minutes. Victoria nodded, relief washing through her. And then Commander Wilson has arranged transport on a C-130 to Anchorage. Miguel paused. But there's a condition. The executives exchanged glances. Victoria raised an eyebrow. What condition? We need to transport medical supplies to a remote clinic near Juneau on our way. Emergency situation. Charles immediately objected. We don't have time for humanitarian detours. The Nakamura deal is the condition, Miguel cut in firmly. Coast Guard isn't a taxi service. They're doing us a favor while fulfilling their mission. Victoria studied him for a moment, then nodded. Done. How long will it delay us? 30 minutes. I've already calculated it into our timeline. We'll make Anchorage with a 3-hour window for the Tokyo connection. Charles looked from Miguel to Victoria, credulous. You're taking logistics advice from the janitor now? The hangar fell silent. Even the rain seemed to pause. Victoria turned slowly to face her CFO, her voice dangerously quiet. That janitor just saved all our lives with flying skills you and I can only dream of, Charles. So yes, I'm taking his advice on aviation logistics. She smiled thin. Unless you'd prefer to swim to Tokyo? Charles flushed but said nothing more. The other executives found sudden interest in their phones or the hangar floor. Victoria turned back to Miguel. 90 minutes gives us time to regroup. Let's use it wisely. As the executives dispersed to prepare, Victoria gestured for Miguel to join her near the hangar door. Away from the others, they stood watching the rain together, an unlikely pair united by circumstance. Your CFO doesn't like me much, Miguel observed. Victoria sighed. Charles doesn't like anything that disrupts his carefully ordered world. Finding out the man who cleans his office is actually a decorated military pilot qualifies as a significant disruption. And you? Miguel asked quietly. How are you handling the disruption? The question was bold, a janitor questioning a CEO about her field, but they were long past such distinctions now. Victoria considered her answer carefully. I'm reassessing certain assumptions, she admitted. About you, about my company. She paused. About myself. Miguel nodded, accepting her answer without pressing further. May I ask you something personal? Victoria ventured after a moment. You can ask. Your daughter, you said she's in medical school? Miguel's expression softened slightly. Johns Hopkins, 2nd year, specializing in pediatric oncology. Because of her mother? He nodded. Maya was 10 when Angela died. Watched the whole terrible process. Decided then she wanted to help other children with sick parents. Victoria absorbed this. You must be very proud. Every day, Miguel confirmed. Everything I've done has been for her, including staying as a janitor when you could have been flying commercially, making 10 times the salary. Miguel turned to face her fully. A commercial pilot's life is irregular, gone for days at a time. Maya needed stability after her mother died, needed me home every night. He shrugged. The choice wasn't difficult. Victoria tried to process this. The concept of someone voluntarily choosing a lower position for family reasons was foreign to her relentlessly ambitious mindset. And now, she pressed, Maya's grown. Why stay? Miguel smiled slightly. Inertia. Partly, and I meant what I said earlier. There's dignity in maintaining a building where thousands of people work, in doing a job well, whatever it is. He glanced back at the damaged helicopter. But I've missed flying, more than I realized. The confession hung between them, simple but profound. Victoria found herself wondering what else this man had sacrificed, what other talents remained hidden beneath the unassuming exterior she'd overlooked for so long. Before she could respond, Charles approached, tablet in hand. Victoria, we need to discuss the offering adjustments. The Nakamura is going to want compensation for the delay. She nodded. I'll be right there. As Charles retreated, she turned back to Miguel. Duty calls, I understand, he replied. I'll check the weather reports, coordinate with the incoming helicopter. They separated, each returning to familiar roles. The CEO to her negotiations, the pilot to his flight planning. Yet something had shifted fundamentally between them, a mutual respect that transcended their official positions. An hour later, the distinctive thump-thump of rotor blades announced the Coast Guard helicopter's approach. The rain had diminished to a light drizzle, and patches of blue were visible between the clouds. Miguel stepped outside first, establishing visual contact with the incoming aircraft. Victoria joined him, watching as the orange and white helicopter circled once before settling onto the wet tarmac beside their damaged Augusta. 2 Coast Guard officers emerged, approaching with purposeful stride. The taller one, a weathered man with captain's insignia, broke into a wide grin upon seeing Miguel. Reyes, you old son of a gun, he called out, extending his hand. Still finding trouble wherever you go, I see. Miguel shook the offered hand firmly. Wilson. Thanks for the rescue. Captain Wilson surveyed the damaged helicopter. Lightning strike? You always did have a talent for the impossible landing. He turned to Victoria with a respectful nod. Captain Wilson, ma'am. Coast Guard. Your pilot here once saved my entire team in the Hindu Kush. Figured I owed him one. Victoria glanced at Miguel, who maintained his characteristically modest expression despite this revelation of another heroic chapter in his past. We're grateful for your assistance, Captain, she replied. Mr. Reyes mentioned a medical delivery. Wilson nodded. Insulin and antibiotics for a clinic cut off by the storm. Quick stop on the way to Juneau, then we'll get you to the C-130. Victoria turned to collect her team. As the executives filed toward the waiting helicopter, she noticed Miguel lingering by their damaged aircraft, his hand resting briefly on its fuselage, a pilot's farewell to a faithful machine. The gesture, so small yet so telling, crystallized something in Victoria's mind. A decision began forming, one that would alter both their futures in ways neither could yet imagine. The Coast Guard helicopter cut through patches of clearing sky, its powerful engines a reassuring contrast to their earlier damaged aircraft. Inside, Victoria and her executives sat across from crates of medical supplies secured to the floor with cargo netting. Miguel occupied the co-pilot seat beside Captain Wilson, occasionally conferring with him over the headset, pointing to navigation displays and weather patterns as if he'd never left the profession. From her seat, Victoria observed their easy camaraderie, the shorthand communication of men who understood the sky in ways she never would. Despite her own pilot's license, she'd earned hers as a vanity accomplishment, a box to check. For men like Miguel and Wilson, flying wasn't an achievement, it was an identity. The helicopter banked sharply, descending toward a small clearing beside what appeared to be a collection of modest buildings, nestled against a mountainside. Yakutat Clinic, Wilson announced over the intercom. 7 minutes on the ground, folks. Stay aboard unless instructed otherwise. As they touched down, Wilson turned to Miguel. Want to help with the offload? Just like old times. Miguel nodded, unbuckling his harness. He glanced back at Victoria, who gave him a slight nod of approval, though she realized immediately it wasn't her permission he needed. For the first time in 20 years, Miguel Reyes was operating outside her corporate hierarchy, reclaiming a part of himself long submerged beneath the janitor's uniform. Victoria watched through the helicopter's window as Miguel and Wilson carried crates of supplies toward a small group of people who had emerged from the main building. Among them was an older native Alaskan woman who embraced Miguel with obvious affection, speaking animatedly as she gestured toward the clinic. Who is that woman? Victoria asked one of the Coast Guard crew members. Dr. Naomi Kalatek, the young officer replied. Runs the clinic here. Serves 5 villages in the region. He hesitated, then added, she's kind of a legend in these parts. Victoria's curiosity deepened. And she knows Mr. Reyes? The officer shrugged. Couldn't say, ma'am. Charles leaned across the aisle, his voice low enough for only Victoria to hear. Are we really going to sit here while our billion-dollar deal hangs in the balance? For what, insulin deliveries and a janitor's reunion tour? Victoria fixed him with a cool stare. We're here because Monsieur Reyes secured us transportation when we had none. We can spare 7 minutes for life-saving medicine. Charles subsided, but his expression remained sour. Victoria returned her attention to the window, where Miguel was now kneeling beside a young child in a wheelchair, speaking to her with the same attentive focus he'd shown when flying through the storm. When Miguel and Wilson returned to the helicopter, Victoria noticed a subtle change in the janitor's demeanor, a lightness, as if something long constrained had been momentarily freed. Thank you for your patience, Miguel said as he settled back into the co-pilot seat. Dr. Kalatek is treating several children with diabetes. The supplies were critical. Victoria nodded, unexpectedly moved by the simple gratitude in his voice. You know her well? My squadron airlifted her to remote villages during a particularly harsh winter about 15 years ago, Miguel explained. We've stayed in touch. She treats patients others won't travel to see. As they lifted off, Victoria processed this new piece of Miguel's past, the connections he maintained, the lives he'd touched, all invisible to her until today. The janitor, who had moved silently through her building for 2 decades, was revealing himself as a man of substance and surprising depth. The journey to Juneau passed quickly, the weather continuing to improve as they approached the small capital city. At the Coast Guard station, they transferred quickly to the waiting C-130, a massive military transport plane that dwarfed their original helicopter. Inside the Spartan aircraft, Miguel helped Victoria secure her seat harness, his hands moving with professional efficiency. Not exactly your company jet, he observed as the cargo plane's engines roared to life. Victoria smiled wryly. I've flown commercial coach. I'll survive. The unexpected humor caught Miguel off guard, and a brief smile crossed his normally composed features. Good to know you're adaptable. As the C-130 climbed toward cruising altitude, Victoria found herself seated beside Miguel, the executives having clustered further back in the cargo hold to continue preparation for the Nakamura meeting. May I ask you something? She said after they'd been airborne for several minutes. Miguel nodded, his attention shifting from the view outside to her face. The little girl at the clinic hue seemed to know her. A shadow passed over Miguel's expression. Ella, she has type 1 diabetes, diagnosed at age 4. He paused. Reminds me of Maya at that age, brave beyond her years. Victoria considered this. You maintain a lot of connections from your previous life. They're not from a previous life. Miguel corrected gently. Just parts of my life you haven't seen. The subtle rebuke silenced her momentarily. Of course, his existence hadn't begun when he started working at Skyline. He'd had a full, rich life before then, one that continued in parallel with his work as a janitor. She'd just never bothered to notice. That was presumptuous of me, she admitted, the apology unfamiliar on her tongue. Miguel acknowledged her concession with a slight nod. We all have blind spots, some larger than others, apparently. Victoria replied with uncharacteristic self-deprecation. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the drone of the C-130's engines. Victoria found herself wondering about the man beside her, not just his past as a pilot, but the person he was beyond any professional identity. Do you still fly? For pleasure, I mean? She asked eventually. Sometimes, Miguel answered. A friend owns a small flight school outside the city. Lets me take up a Cessna now and then to keep my hours current. Why maintain your certifications if you weren't planning to return to flying professional? Miguel considered the question. Same reason you maintain your pilot's license, I imagine. Once flight gets in your blood, it never really leaves. Victoria raised an eyebrow. How did you know I have a license? You displayed too much familiarity with aviation terminology earlier. And there's a picture in your office you stand in beside a Cirrus SR-22. You've been in my office thousands of times, Victoria noted, surprised. I clean it every night. The simple statement hit Victoria with unexpected force. Every night for 20 years, this man had moved through her personal space, emptying her trash, dusting her awards, vacuuming her carpet all while carrying within him the experiences and skills she was only now discovering. I don't think I've ever thanked you, she said suddenly, for keeping my office clean all these years. Miguel looked genuinely surprised. It's my job still. Thank you. Before he could respond, Captain Wilson approached from the cockpit. We're making good time, he reported. Weather to Anchorage is clear. You should make your connection to Tokyo with about 2 hours to spare. Victoria nodded her appreciation. Thank you, Captain, for everything. As Wilson returned to the cockpit, Victoria turned back to Miguel. What will you do when we reach Anchorage? Report to the Coast Guard station there. Help arrange transportation back for our damaged helicopter. And after that, Victoria pressed, back to Skyline? Back to mopping floors? Miguel studied her for a long moment. That depends. On what? On whether you still want to honor our bet? The reference to their wager made when she thought him nothing more than a janitor with delusions of grandeur brought Victoria up short. She'd bet 1% of her company that he couldn't land the helicopter. Not only had he landed it, but he'd done so under catastrophic conditions that would have challenged the world's best pilots. You won, she acknowledged quietly. Miguel shook his head. I didn't do it to win a bet. Why'd you do it then? Victoria asked. Step forward when you could have stayed invisible? Risk your life for people who never saw you? Miguel's answer was simple but profound. Because I could help. And because sometimes Miss Chamberlain being seen matters. Miguel's words hung in the air between them. Being seen matters. Such a simple statement, yet it cut through Victoria's carefully constructed worldview with surgical precision. How many others at Skyline moved through the building like ghosts, their talents and stories invisible to her? The thought was uncomfortable, challenging fundamental assumptions about her leadership. Before she could respond, Charles approached, tablet in hand. Victoria, the Nakamura's sent over revised terms. They're using our delay as leverage. His voice carried the smug tone of someone who'd predicted disaster. They want an additional 8% equity stake and 2 board seats. Victoria's focus shifted instantly. CEO mode engaging like a shield. Unacceptable. Prepare a counteroffer at 3%. 1 observer seat. And make sure Jensen has the market analysis ready for our arrival. Charles nodded curtly, casting a suspicious glance at Miguel before retreating to the rear of the aircraft where the other executives huddled. He really doesn't like me, Miguel observed. Victoria sighed. Charles sees the world in neat hierarchies. You've disrupted his understanding of the natural order. And you? Miguel asked. How do you see the world? The question was disarmingly direct. Victoria considered deflecting, but found herself answering honestly. I've always believed in meritocracy. That talent rises, that excellence is recognized and rewarded. She paused. Today has complicated that belief. Because I didn't rise? Because you chose not to, Victoria clarified. That possibility never occurred to me. Their conversation was interrupted by Captain Wilson announcing their approach to Anchorage. The massive C-130 began its descent, eventually touching down with a series of jolts on the runway. As they taxied toward the terminal, Victoria's phone regained signal, immediately buzzing with accumulated messages. She scanned them quickly, her expression tightening. Problem? Miguel asked. Nothing unexpected. Board members questioning my judgment. Shareholders nervous about the Nakamura negotiation. She slipped the phone into her pocket. Standard crisis management. The plane came to a stop, and the rear cargo door lowered with a hydraulic whine. Cold Alaskan air rushed in as everyone gathered their belongings. Victoria turned to Miguel. Our commercial flight to Tokyo leaves in 2 hours. Will you be joining us? Miguel shook his head. My job was to get you here safely. Mission accomplished. Your job, Victoria echoed, testing the word. As a pilot or as a janitor? Today as a pilot, Miguel replied simply. Victoria studied him for a moment, then nodded. Thank you, Mr. Reyes, for everything. She extended her hand formally. Miguel took it, their handshake brief but firm. Good luck with the Nakamuras. As Victoria turned to join her waiting executives, Miguel called after her. Ms. Chamberlain? She paused, looking back. About the bet, he said. I don't want your company's shares. Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly. A deal's a deal, Mr. Reyes. You won fair and square. I didn't do it for the bet, he repeated. I did it because it needed to, and single quotes. Before Victoria could respond, Charles appeared at her elbow. Our car is waiting. We need to move if we're going to make the Tokyo flight. With a last glance at Miguel standing beside the massive military aircraft, Victoria allowed herself to be ushered away, back into the world of corporate negotiations and strategic maneuvers that had defined her life for so long. 2 hours later, settled in the first-class cabin of a commercial airliner bound for Tokyo, Victoria found her thoughts repeatedly drifting from the Nakamura contract notes to the enigmatic janitor who had saved their lives. Father had taught her to judge people by their actions under pressure, and by that standard, Miguel Reyes outshone everyone in her executive team. Something's troubling you, observed Jensen, her chief legal counsel, from the seat beside her. Victoria closed the file she'd been pretending to read, just considering angles for the negotiation. Jensen, a perceptive man who had worked with her for 15 years, clearly didn't believe her. This is about the janitor, isn't it? The pilot. Victoria's silence was answer enough. He's quite remarkable, Jensen continued. I spoke with him briefly on the C-130. Did you know he turned down a job with Eclipse Aviation after leaving the military? Head of test flight operations? Said the schedule would keep him away from his daughter too much. This was news to Victoria. How do you know that? I asked him. Jensen replied simply. People generally tell you their stories if you express genuine interest. The gentle rebuke wasn't lost on Victoria. She'd never asked, never shown interest. Miguel had been furniture to Herc's present, but unnoticed. What are you going to do about the bet? Jensen asked. Victoria sighed. He says he doesn't want the shares. That doesn't surprise me. From what I gather, Mr. Reyes isn't motivated by money or status. Jensen adjusted his glasses thoughtfully. But perhaps there's something else of value you could offer him. Before Victoria could respond, the plane lurched violently. Overhead compartments popped open, spilling contents into the aisle. The seatbelt sign illuminated with an urgent chime. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain's voice came over the intercom. Unnaturally calm. We're experiencing severe turbulence. Please return to your seats immediately and secure your seatbelts. Another violent jolt shook the aircraft. Somewhere behind them, a passenger screamed. The plane dropped suddenly, the sensation of freefall causing Victoria's stomach to lurch. Engine failure, a flight attendant whispered as she rushed past, her professional composure cracking. Port side. Victoria gripped her armrests, a new kind of fear gripping her. Just hours after surviving one aviation emergency, they were facing another. But this time, Miguel Reyes wasn't in the cockpit. The plane banked sharply, beginning a rapid descent. The captain's voice returned, the practiced calm now strained with tension. We've lost power in one engine and are diverting to Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky in eastern Russia. Please remain calm and follow all crew instructions. Charles, seated across the aisle, had gone deathly pale. Russia? We can't land in Russia. The Nakamura deal. We'll have to wait. Victoria cut him off sharply. Focus on surviving first. As the plane continued its controlled descent toward the Russian airfield, Victoria found herself thinking of Miguel, his steady hands on the helicopter controls, his calm voice guiding them through the storm. She'd bet her company that he couldn't land that helicopter. Now she would have given anything to have him flying this plane. Hours later, the Skyline executives sat in a sparse waiting area of the remote Russian airport. Their emergency landing had been successful, but the damaged aircraft would require extensive repairs. They were effectively stranded, thousands of miles from Tokyo, with the Nakamura deadline looming less than 36 hours away. Victoria paced the small room, phone pressed to her ear. No. That's unacceptable. I need transport to Tokyo immediately. Price is no object. She listened briefly before ending the call in frustration. Nothing, she reported to her team. No commercial flights, no charter services willing to pick us up. The nearest major airport is 8 hours away by car, and even then, our options are limited. Charles looked defeated. We should contact the Nakamuras, explain the situation, ask for an extension. Absolutely not, Victoria snapped. That would signal weakness. They'd use it to demand even more concessions. Jensen cleared his throat. There might be another option. He held up his phone, displaying a message. I took the liberty of contacting Mr. Reyes about our situation. Victoria stared at him. You did what? He's still in Anchorage, Jensen continued calmly, and he has a solution. Victoria stared at Jensen in disbelief. You contacted our janitor about an international aviation crisis? I contacted the highly skilled pilot who saved our lives earlier today, Jensen corrected mildly, and it appears that was the right call. Victoria took the phone, reading the message displayed on the screen. Asterisk have friend with private G650 in Sapporo. Can divert to Petropavlovsk, then direct to Tokyo. Need confirmation within hour. Miguel asterisk Victoria's pulse quickened. A Gulfstream G650 was one of the fastest private jets in the world, capable of crossing the remaining distance to Tokyo in hours rather than days. How does a janitor have friends with G650s? Charles demanded, reading over Victoria's shoulder. Jensen shrugged. Perhaps if you'd ever spoken to him beyond asking for your trash to be emptied, you'd know. Charles bristled, but Victoria cut him off. Not now, Charles. She handed the phone back to Jensen. Tell him yes immediately and ask what he needs from us. As Jensen typed the the response. Victoria paced the small waiting area, her mind racing. The irony wasn't lost on Hurt. Weiss in one day, their fate depended on the man she'd dismissed for 20 years. The man she'd arrogantly wagered couldn't land a helicopter. He's responding, Jensen announced, drawing Victoria back to his side. Asterisk will arrange landing clearance through military channels. Need passenger list and passport numbers ASAP. Have team ready to move in 3 hours. Second message to follow. Asterisk Victoria immediately directed her team to compile the required information. As they scrambled to comply, Jensen's phone pinged with Miguel's promised follow-up. Asterisk plane owner is Xavier Kurosawa. Expects personal thanks from CEO. Former military pilot. Proper protocol matters. Asterisk. Victoria committed the name to memory. Kurosawa. Japanese. Half, Jensen replied, already researching on his tablet. Xavier Kurosawa, former Japanese Air Self-Defense Force, then private aviation consultant, now runs high-end charter service based in Tokyo. He looked up. Eyebrows raised, specializes in emergency diplomatic extractions and corporate crisis response. Charles scoffed, and we're supposed to believe our janitor just happens to be friends with an elite international pilot who owns a $20 million jet. Victoria was beginning to realize that just happens to be was a phrase that fundamentally misunderstood. Miguel Reyes. His connections weren't coincidences, but the natural web of relationships built over a lifetime of service and earned respect or network invisible to her only because she had never bothered to see it. Send Reyes the passenger information, she instructed Jensen, and tell him ... single quotes. She paused, considering her words carefully. Tell him I'm grateful. 3 hours later, as promised, a sleek white Gulfstream touched down on the runway of the remote Russian airport. Victoria watched through the terminal windows as it taxied toward them, its gleaming fuselage emblazoned with a distinctive blue and red logo, Kurosawa Crisis Solution. Russian officials who had been bureaucratically obstructive just hours earlier now moved with surprising efficiency, processing the Skyline team's documents and escorting them directly to the waiting aircraft. At the foot of the boarding stairs stood a tall, distinguished Japanese man in his early 60s, his posture unmistakably military despite the tailored civilian clothes. Miss Chamberlain, he greeted her with a formal bow. Xavier Kurosawa, welcome aboard. Victoria returned the bow with equal formality. Mia Kurosawa, I cannot adequately express my gratitude for this extraordinary assistance. Kurosawa's stern expression softened slightly. No gratitude necessary. I owe Miguel Reyes my life twice over. This barely begins to repay that debt. Victoria's curiosity must have shown on her face, because Kurosawa continued as he escorted her up the stairs. Afghanistan, 2004. Our extraction went bad. 3 aircraft down, enemy closing in. Everyone else had written us off. His voice took on a reverent quality. Then comes this American helicopter right into the hottest landing zone I've ever seen. Pilot so calm he might have been picking up groceries instead of flying into hell. They reached the top of the stairs, pausing before entering the luxurious cabin. That was Miguel? Victoria asked, already knowing the answer. Kurosawa nodded. First time he saved me. Second time was after I'd left the service. Bad situation in Myanmar. Medical emergency, no available evacuation. He tapped his chest. Heart attack. Miguel arranged everything from half a world away. Called in favors I didn't know existed. Victoria absorbed this new piece of the puzzle that was Miguel Reyes, yet he never mentioned knowing you. Would you have cared if he had? Kurosawa asked, his directness reminiscent of Miguel himself. The question struck Victoria like a physical blow. No, she admitted. I wouldn't have. Kurosawa studied her for a moment, then gestured toward the cabin. We should depart. Tokyo awaits. The interior of the Gulfstream was a marvel of luxury, a buttery leather and polished wood, with state-of-the-art communication systems integrated seamlessly into the design. The executives settled into the plush seats with visible relief, the strain of their ordeal temporarily forgotten in the comfort of their surroundings. Victoria took a seat near the cockpit, where Kurosawa joined her after speaking briefly with his co-pilot. We'll reach Tokyo in approximately 4 hours, he informed. Well ahead of your meeting with the Nakamuras. Victoria nodded her thanks. You seem well informed about our situation. Miguel explained the stakes. Kurosawa confirmed. He also mentioned a wager between you. Victoria felt heat rise to her cheeks. He told you about that? He said you bet your company he couldn't land a helicopter. Kurosawa replied, his expression unreadable. And that he proved you wrong. Victoria looked away, uncharacteristically embarrassed. I underestimated him severely. Many have, Kurosawa said, usually only once. As the Gulfstream climbed to cruising altitude, Victoria found herself reflecting on Kurosawa's words. She had underestimated Miguel, not just his skills as a pilot, but his entire being. The man who had moved invisibly through her corporate domain for 20 years possessed a wealth of connections, respect, and capabilities she had never imagined. When Kurosawa excused himself to check on their flight plan, Victoria turned to Jensen, who was working quietly beside her. Did you know, she asked, about Miguel, about who he really is? Jensen looked up from his tablet. Not specific, but I've always found him to be ... more than he appeared. You talked to him, Victoria observed. Over the years I did, Jensen confirmed. He has fascinating perspectives on geopolitics, military history. We've had quite a few interesting conversations while he emptied my recycling bin. Victoria felt a pang of something unfamiliar, regret, perhaps, or shame. 20 years of opportunity to know a remarkable human being, squandered because she couldn't see past a uniform and a job title. He's not going back to being a janitor, she said, the decision crystallizing in her mind. Not if I can help it. Jensen smiled slightly. I think that should be his choice, don't you? The question gave Victoria pause. She had been about to make the same mistake again, assuming she knew what was best. That her world of corporate advancement was inherently superior to Miguel's choices. Yes, she admitted, it should be his choice. As the Gulf Stream soared toward Tokyo, Victoria found herself composing a mental list, not of executive orders or corporate strategies, but of questions. Questions she should have asked Miguel Reyes 20 years ago. Questions about his life, his experiences, his choices. Questions that might help her truly see the man who had twice now saved everything she valued. Tokyo materialized beneath them as the Gulf Stream began its descent, a sprawling metropolis of lights glittering against the darkness of early evening. The journey had been smooth and swift, a stark contrast to the turbulent events that had preceded it. In the cabin, Victoria's team made final preparations for the Nakamura meeting, their confidence restored by the prospect of arriving not just on time, but ahead of schedule. Victoria sat apart from them, gazing out the window as the city grew larger below. Her thoughts remained with Miguel Reyes, the janitor who had become their savior twice over. She'd learned more about him in the past 24 hours than in 20 years of passing him in hallways, and each revelation deepened her sense that she had fundamentally misjudged not just him, but perhaps her entire approach to leadership. Kurosawa settled into the seat across from her, offering a cup of tea. We'll be landing in 15 minutes, he informed her. My car will take you directly to the Nakamura headquarters. Victoria accepted the tea with a grateful nod. Miss Kurosawa, may I ask you something personal? The Japanese pilot raised an eyebrow but nodded. You clearly have a successful business, resources, connections, yet you dropped everything to help Miguel Reyes. Why? Kurosawa considered the question, his weathered face thoughtful. In my culture, we have a concept called a debt of gratitude that cannot be fully repaid. When Miguel saved my life, he created this debt. He sipped his tea before continuing. But it goes deeper than obligation. Miguel lives by a code few understand: duty without recognition, excellence without reward, service without condition. Victoria absorbed his words, recognizing the truth, and he's been like that for 20 years at my company. I just never saw it. With respect, Ms. Chamberlain, did you ever look? Kurosawa's question held no judgment, only curiosity. Victoria didn't immediately answer. The honest response would have been no, and they both knew it. Kurosawa set down his cup. There's a Japanese proverb, the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. In your America, I believe the expression involves squeaky wheels and oil. He smiled slightly. Miguel is neither a nail nor a wheel. He does not seek attention or advancement in the traditional sense. Then what does he seek? Victoria asked. Purpose, Kurosawa replied simply. The knowledge that his work matters, whether anyone notices or not. He paused, though being noticed occasionally wouldn't hurt. The Gulfstream touched down with barely a bump, taxiing toward a private terminal separate from the main airport. Through the window, Victoria could see a black limousine waiting on the tarmac, its driver standing at attention beside it. Your chariot, Kurosawa observed, rising as the aircraft came to a complete stop. As the executives gathered their belongings and prepared to disembark, Victoria turned to Kurosawa one last time. How can I repay you for this? She asked. The Japanese pilot smiled. You cannot repay me, but you can repay Miguel. How? That, Kurosawa replied. You will have to discover for yourself. The Nakamura headquarters occupied the upper floors of a gleaming skyscraper in Tokyo's financial district. Victoria and her team were escorted to a conference room on the 60th floor, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city and distant Mount Fuji, silhouetted against the setting sun. Hideki Nakamura himself greeted them, a dignified man in his 70s whose traditional manners belied a ruthless business acumen. Ms. Chamberlain, he said with a formal bow. We had begun to wonder if you would join us. Victoria returned the bow with equal formality. Mr. Nakamura, thank you for your patience. We encountered some unexpected challenges in our journey. So I understand, Nakamura replied, his eyes twinkling with amusement. A rather dramatic series of aviation incidents, I'm told. Victoria raised an eyebrow. News travels fast. In certain circles, Nakamura agreed. My son-in-law's with the Japanese Coast Guard. He mentioned an unusual request for landing clearance from an old friend, a pilot named Reyes. Victoria couldn't hide her surprise. You know Miguel? Nakamura gestured for her to take a seat at the head of the conference table. Not personally, but his reputation precedes him. Military circles still speak of certain extraction missions with considerable awe. As the other executives filed in and introductions were made, Victoria found herself reevaluating the situation. She had come to Tokyo prepared for a hard-fought negotiation, possibly even ready to concede to Nakamura's increased demands given their delayed arrival. Now she wondered if Miguel's invisible influence might extend even here, to the very deal she had been so desperate to close. The negotiations began with the usual formalities, but Victoria quickly sensed a shift in the atmosphere. The harsh terms Charles had warned about were not forthcoming. Instead, Nakamura seemed almost conciliatory, interested primarily in the strategic partnership rather than extracting maximum concessions. During a brief recess, Victoria stepped away to a private corner of the room, calling Jensen over. "It's different," she murmured. "Nakamura is being unusually accommodating." Jensen nodded. "I noticed." Charles is perplexed. "He was certain they would use our delayed arrival against us." Victoria glanced toward Nakamura, who was speaking quietly with his chief financial officer. Could it be connected to Miguel somehow? "The way Nakamura mentioned him, possible," Jensen allowed. In Japanese business culture, personal connections and respect often outweigh purely financial considerations. If Miguel is held in high regard by people Nakamura respects, single quotes, Victoria made a decision. "I need to make a call before we continue." Stepping out onto a private balcony overlooking the Tokyo skyline, Victoria dialed a number she'd obtained from Jensen. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. "Mr. Reyes," she said. "It's Victoria Chamberlain." "Ms. Chamberlain," Miguel replied, his tone revealing nothing. "I trust you arrived safely?" "We did, thanks to your extraordinary assistance." Miss Kurosawa was most accommodating. "Xavier is a good man," Miguel said simply. "How are the negotiations proceeding?" Victoria hesitated. "Better than expected." "Surprisingly better." She paused. "Mr. Nakamura mentioned you." A brief silence followed. "Did he?" "He said his son-in-law's with the Japanese Coast Guard, that you're known in certain circles." Miguel's response was typically modest. "I've worked with various international units over the years." "Mr. Reyes," Victoria said, cutting through the evasion. "Did you know about this connection when you arranged our transport to Tokyo?" "I knew Kurosawa had relationships with the Nakamura family," Miguel acknowledged. "But that wasn't why I called him." "Then why did you?" Victoria pressed. "Because you needed help," Miguel answered, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "And because I could provide it." The simplicity of his response struck Victoria new. No ulterior motives, no complex machinations, just straightforward service when it was needed. "The bet," she said suddenly. "You won it fair and square. 1% of Skyline is yours. As I told you before, I don't want your shares." Miguel replied. "Then what do you want?" Victoria asked. "There must be something." The line went silent for so long that Victoria wondered if they'd been disconnected. Finally, Miguel spoke. "Recognition," he said quietly. "Not for myself, for all of us. The invisible ones who keep your company running. The maintenance staff, the security guards, the cafeteria work, the people you and your executives walk past every day without seeing." Victoria closed her eyes, letting the truth of his words wash over her. "I understand," she said, and for the first time she truly did. Returning to the conference room, Victoria approached the negotiations with renewed clarity. The deal wasn't just about numbers on a page or seats on a board. It was about people, the thousands of employees whose livelihoods depended on Skyline's success. From the executive suite to the janitorial closet. And somewhere in Anchorage, a man in a maintenance uniform had just reminded her of that fundamental truth. 3 days later, Victoria stood on the helipad atop Skyline Tower, watching a new Augusta AW109 touch down where their adventure had begun. The morning sun glinted off its pristine white exterior, freshly painted with the Skyline logo. The rotors slowed to a stop and the pilot's door opened. Miguel Reyes stepped out, no longer in a janitor's uniform, but dressed in the sharp navy flight suit she'd had delivered to his home that morning. He approached with the same quiet dignity he'd always possessed, though there was something different in his bearing now, a subtle confidence that came from being fully seen. "Miss Chamberlain," he greeted her, stopping a respectful distance away. "Mr. Reyes," she replied. "I see the flight suit fits." He glanced down at the tailored garment, emblazoned with the Skyline logo and his name. "It does, though I'm still not entirely clear on why I'm wearing it." Victoria gestured toward the helicopter. "What do you think of her?" Miguel turned to study the aircraft with a professional eye. "Beautiful machine. Upgrades on the avionics package. Extended fuel capacity." He ran a hand along the gleaming fuselage. "Someone did their homework." "I had help," Victoria admitted. "Your friend Kurosawa was quite specific about the modifications." Miguel nodded appreciatively, then turned back to her. "You didn't need to do this, Miss Chamberlain." "Actually, I did," Victoria replied, "for several reasons." She reached into her jacket and withdrew an envelope. "The Nakamura deal closed yesterday. Full partnership. Better terms than we initially hoped for." "Congratulations," Miguel said sincerely. "Their CEO mentioned you in his final remarks," Victoria continued. "Something about honor and obligations that transcend business. I didn't fully understand the cultural context, but the sentiment was clear." Miguel remained characteristically modest. "I'm glad it worked out." "It did, beyond our expectations." Victoria handed him the envelope. "Which brings me to this." Miguel opened it, his expression shifting from curiosity to confusion as he scanned the document inside. "This is a corporate appointment. Director of Aviation Operations, Skyline Enterprise." He looked up. "I don't understand." "It's simple," Victoria explained. "Skyline is expanding its international operations. We need our own aviation division aircraft, pilots, Maintenance facility. The Nakamura partnership makes it not just viable but necessary. She paused. I need someone to build it from the ground up. Someone who understands both aviation and skyline itself. Miguel studied the document again, noting the compensation package, a figure that eclipsed his janitor's salary many times over. And the 1%? He asked quietly. Is still yours, Victoria confirmed. Consider it back pay for 20 years of being undervalued. But the position isn't about the bet. It's about putting the right person in the right role. Miguel was silent for a long moment, his gaze returning to the helicopter. I have conditions, he said finally. Victoria raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. First, the maintenance staff gets a comprehensive review: compensation, benefits, working conditions. They're the backbone of this company, and they should be treated as such. Victoria nodded. Already in progress. What else? Second, I want to establish a scholarship program for children of service workers, not just at Skyline, but throughout the industry. Full rides for deserving students. Agreed, Victoria said without hesitation. And third, Miguel's expression softened slightly. My daughter graduates medical school next month. I need that day off. Victoria smiled. I think we can accommodate that. She extended her hand. Do we have a deal, Director Reyes? Miguel considered her outstretched hand, 20 years of history hanging in the balance between them. One more thing, he said. In the cockpit, we're equals. Cooling rank when we fly together. Victoria's eyebrows shot up. You assume I'll be flying with you, won't you? Miguel asked, a rare hint of challenge in his voice. She couldn't help but smile. Yes, I suppose I will. They shook hands, sealing not just a business arrangement, but a new understanding, one built on mutual respect rather than hierarchy. When do I start? Miguel asked. You already have, Victoria replied, gesturing toward the boardroom one floor below, visible through the glass walls. Quote, your first team is waiting. Former military pilots transitioning to civilian life, top of their class, impeccable records. Miguel glanced at the assembled men and women in the conference room, recognizing the bearing of fellow service members. Seems you've been busy, he observed. I had 3 days in Tokyo with very little to do once the deal was signed, Victoria explained, and a lot to think about. A comfortable silence fell between them as they both contemplated the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. I have to ask, Victoria said finally, that first day, when you stepped forward, why then, after 20 years, why choose that moment to reveal yourself? Miguel considered the question. Your brother was on that flight to the research facility, wasn't he? Victoria's surprise was evident. Thomas? Yes, he was meeting us there. How did you know? I clean your office, Miguel reminded her gently. I've seen the photos on your desk, the way you check in on him daily, the calendar reminder for his monthly treatments. Shrugged. It wasn't hard to connect the dots when I heard about the meeting at the research center. Victoria felt a fresh wave of awe at this man who noticed everything while remaining unnoticed himself. So you stepped forward because my brother was involved? Miguel shook his head. I stepped forward because you needed help. The stakes just made it more important that I didn't fail. The simplicity of his answer moved her unexpectedly. Before she could respond, the glass door to the helipad opened, and Charles emerged, his expression a mixture of discomfort and resignation. Victoria, the board is assembled in the main conference room, he reported stiffly. They're eager to meet the new ... Director of Aviation, a slight hesitation before. Miguel's title spoke volumes about Charles's continuing struggle with the reorganized hierarchy. Victoria acknowledged him with a nod. We'll be right there. As Charles retreated, she turned back to Miguel. Ready to meet your new colleagues? Some of them might find the transition ... challenge. Miguel's lips quirked in the ghost of a smile. Change usually is. As they walked toward the door, Victoria paused. I've been meaning to ask all those years. Did it bother you, being invisible to us? Miguel considered the question seriously. Not invisible, he corrected. Just unseen. There's a difference. And now? Victoria asked. Miguel gazed at the helicopter, then at the skyline tower stretching below them, the building he had maintained meticulously for 2 decades. Now the headquarters of a division he would build. Now, he said simply, it feels like coming home. Single quotes together. They descended to the boardroom, no longer CEO and janitor, but partners in a new venture. Behind them, the morning sun illuminated the helicopter on the landing pad, a gleaming symbol of second chances and new beginnings. In the weeks that followed, stories circulated throughout Skyline Enterprises. Employees spoke in hushed, amazed tones about the janitor who became an executive overnight. Some versions claimed he'd blackmailed the CEO. Others insisted he'd saved her life during a terrorist attack. The truth, as Victoria discovered, was both simpler and more profound. Miguel Reyes hadn't changed. He'd always been exactly who he was, a man of exceptional skill, unwavering integrity, and quiet dignity. The only change was in how others perceived him, in how she perceived him. 6 months later, Victoria stood on the same helipad, watching as Miguel ran through pre-flight checks on what was now a familiar routine. Twice monthly, they flew together to visit Skyline's expanding network of international offices, the CEO and the Director of Aviation, partners in the company's most successful expansion to date. Ready, Miss Chamberlain? Miguel called from the cockpit, his voice coming through her headset. Victoria secured her harness in the co-pilot's seat. Ready when you are, Mr. Reyes. As the helicopter lifted off, rising above the city skyline, Victoria reflected on the wager that had changed everything. She had bet her company that a janitor couldn't land a helicopter. She had lost that bet, but gained something far more valuable: the understanding that true worth isn't determined by titles or positions, but by character and actions, and the recognition that sometimes the most remarkable people are hiding in plain sight, waiting only to be seen. Miguel guided the helicopter with his usual precision, the city falling away beneath them as they soared into the clear blue sky. Victoria couldn't help but smile at the journey that had brought them here, from skepticism to trust, from hierarchy to partnership. It had taken a storm, a crash landing, and a desperate race across the globe. But she had finally learned what Miguel had known all along: that every person, regardless of their role, deserves to be valued for who they truly are, rather than the uniform they wear. And sometimes the most important person in the room is the one you never noticed at all.